Voters are being turned away from the polls due to a series of controversial identification trials taking place across the country as millions of people take part in the local elections today. Problems have arisen with ID trials piloted in Bromley, Gosport, Swindon, Watford and Woking elections, where people have been told they do not have the correct documents to submit their votes. The trial, introduced by the Cabinet Office, means residents must bring photo ID or 2 documents showing proof of address from an approved list of sources. But it has been branded nonsense by some angry locals whose attempts to vote were rejected, including 76-year-old Peter White, who could not vote in Bromley for the first time since 1957 despite knowing the volunteers at the station. The plan, similar to a system in the US, has divided opinion, with some supporting it as a way to stop election fraud and others claiming it will disenfranchise vulnerable people, including older voters. Millions are voting in more than 4,000 seats across England today, but London is expected to be a key battleground, with Westminster, Barnet, Wandsworth, and Richmond upon Thames all targets. It could be a difficult day for Theresa May as the Conservatives face losing ground to Labour in London in what could be a political wipeout, although Jeremy Corbyn's party has also drifted in national polls following the anti-Semitism scandal. Experts believe the Tories could be left with just 2 councils in the capital, although pollsters say the party will present much stiffer competition elsewhere across the UK. Mr. White, 76, of Bromley, said he was shocked to be turned away at the polls because he did not have his bank card or passport on him. He told The Independent, "I can't vote, even though the people know me here, and I have been a candidate for the Liberals before." "Even after all that, they still won't let me vote. Considering they know me, the chances of other people coming down to vote are going to be even less." This is a nonsense scheme. The ID trials causing controversy today were brought in by the Cabinet Office after reports of alleged electoral fraud through voter impersonation more than doubled between 2014 and 2016, according to the Electoral Commission. The exact form of ID varies from council to council, with some requiring a picture ID and others proof of address. For example, Watford and Swindon required voters to bring their polling cards with them to cast their ballots, whereas it is not compulsory in general. Elsewhere, Woking polling booths are accepting bus passes as photo ID, but Swindon Borough Council are not treating them as acceptable documentation. The toughest restrictions appear to be in Bromley and South East London, where voters must bring either photo IDs such as a passport or driving license, or 2 documents including marriage or birth certificates, bank statements or utility bills, with at least 1 containing proof of address. It sees the UK follow in the footsteps of the US, where 33 states have introduced some form of ID requirement, with Indiana the first to enforce a strict photo ID law in 2006. But critics in the UK say there is no evidence to bring such laws to Britain. Darren Hughes, chief executive of the Electoral Reform Society, said, The government has no evidence to support its mandatory voter ID plans. That is more clear than ever when they push highly misleading statistics, ones which have now been denounced by the official statistics body. It is right that ministers are being held to account over these trials' dodgy foundations. Ministers are grasping at straws, and their draconian push to make ordinary voters show their papers before using their right to vote now looks desperate. The government must stop trying to trick voters and come clean. Last year there were just 28 allegations of personation in polling stations, the type of fraud voter ID seeks to address out of nearly 45 million votes cast. That makes this policy a sledgehammer to crack a nut, particularly when our respected legal system is more than equipped to deal with the issue. This is the latest sign that these trials are ill thought out and raise serious concerns for our democracy. These poorly researched trials must not be a fait accompli to justify a national rollout of voter ID. Angela Wilkins, leader of the Labour group in Bromley, said 5 people have been unable to vote at polling stations as a result of the pilot, and that the scheme is also causing long delays. She tweeted, "Just been round the Sea Palace polling stations. 5 people not able to vote due to Pound's voter ID pilot and several walked away because of queues at Catsmouth at LABOUR4 Bromley." So why are we doing this? At Bromley, the presiding officer at the polling station in Sydenham Tennis Club, in the borough of Bromley, said only a very small percentage of voters had forgotten or were unable to provide ID. The man, who did not wish to be named, said residents had received 5 pieces of information explaining the change in the rules, including leaflets, a note with their polling cards, and a note on the information about recycling and bin collection. He added, "Voters always have the choice to go home and get some ID." Kirstine Ross, 67, who lives nearby, said she had received at least 2 leaflets about the change, although no polling cards had been delivered down her street. Polling cards are important because they're a reminder, she said. When asked if she thought the scheme was a good idea, she replied, "No, it's another restriction on civil liberties. It's just another way to marginalize people who are already marginalized." They might not have any photo ID. Labour councillor Tahir Aziz said a man was turned away from voting at a polling station on Walton Road in Woking because his form of ID, a Surrey County Council document with his picture on it, was not accepted. Mr. Aziz said, "This gentleman turned up, showed his ID which included a picture, that was clearly him, it was an exact resemblance, but they wouldn't accept it as it was not on the list of acceptable forms of ID." He was fuming. He was furious. He is a British national, and he couldn't vote. It is having an impact on certain people being disenfranchised by this trial. Ellie Reeves, Labour MP for Lewisham West, said that 2 people had been turned away from voting this morning because they did not have ID on them. She tweeted, "Just been to vote. Was informed that 2 people had already turned up without ID this morning, so had been unable to vote." Very worrying, and backs up all the evidence that the voter ID pilot in Bromley is plain wrong. Hazel Walters, a resident of Bromley since 1983, told the newspaper, "It's absurd. I think it will discriminate against people. Not everyone's got a passport, a driving license and all of that. I think people will be disenfranchised," she said. "We are trying to get homeless people to exercise their right to vote, and then at the same time we're putting all these barriers in place." The council didn't consult on this or anything. It's so arbitrary and unnecessary when there are real problems we've got to deal with. Cat Smith MP, Shadow Minister for Voter Engagement, said, "The government was warned by the Equality and Human Rights Commission and over 40 leading charities and academics the voter ID will have a disproportionate impact on older people, young people, BME communities, trans people and disabled people." This was always going to be a sledgehammer to crack a nut. The Electoral Commission found that out of nearly 45 million votes cast in the local and general election in 2017, there were only 28 cases of alleged voter fraud. That's less than 0.0007% or 1 case for every 1.6 million votes cast. And out of those 28 cases, there was only 1 conviction. But instead of listening to the experts and the vast evidence base, the government decided to implement a mistaken policy with the full knowledge that voters could be disenfranchised. The fact that voters were denied their right to vote is proof that voter ID has no place in our democracy. Meanwhile, Bradford Council has apologized after a presiding officer turned away voters for not bringing photo identification to a polling station, despite none being necessary, because it was not part of the trial. Finnegan Pope Carter, a company director from Shipley, near Bradford, said he arrived at a polling station at 8 a.m. and was asked for identification papers. He was eventually allowed to vote after fetching his driving license from his car, but Dr. Chris Harris, an archaeological geophysicist and wife to Mr. Pope Carter, was refused multiple times. "I didn't have my polling card or a photo ID on me. I told them repeatedly that I did not need them either. They refused and said I did," she said. Dr. Harris said she almost gave up on casting her vote as the polling station clerks assisted other voters. "I stood my ground and finally they rang a superior who said I was allowed a ballot," she said. A spokesman for Bradford Council said, "We apologize to the very small number of voters concerned who were asked to provide ID to vote in one Shipley polling station today. We were alerted to the matter early this morning, and it was dealt with immediately." To confirm, there is no requirement for voters to provide ID to cast a vote, and a further message has been issued to all polling staff. Mrs. May was among several politicians to cast her ballot early, voting at Central Methodist Hall in Westminster with her husband Philip this morning, while Jeremy Corbyn, Boris Johnson and Sadiq Khan have also been to the polling stations. Meanwhile, the election in Southwark's newly formed London Bridge and West Bermondsey ward has been halted following the death of Conservative candidate Toby Eckersley, aged 76. Mr. Eckersley previously served as a councillor for 37 years in Dulwich and received an MBE for political and public service in 1989. His death means the poll must be rescheduled for a new date within 35 days. London is the major battleground after recent polls pointed towards a substantial swing to Labour. Jeremy Corbyn's party will be hoping to win control of Tower Hamlets and Barnet, and possibly even the flagship Conservative councils of Wandsworth and Westminster. But upsets are also possible around the country, with Labour also hopeful of taking power in town halls from Kirklees and Calderdale in Yorkshire and Trafford and Greater Manchester to Plymouth and Swindon in the south. Polls close at 10 p.m, and the first results could begin to arrive at around midnight and are expected to be in full flow by 2 a.m. Mr. Corbyn had a smile on his face as he went to the polling booth in Islington this morning amid predictions his party is set for a major boost. But Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson did not look too worried as he cast his vote at a polling station in Westminster today. Speaking outside his polling station, Mr. Corbyn accused the Conservatives of killing children with heartless austerity policies today as he ramped up the rhetoric for the local elections. The Labour leader said the government's policies had almost certainly increased the death rate and infant mortality. The intervention comes amid signs the anti-Semitism crisis that has been racking the party could limit its gains in the English council polls. Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell also risked a backlash today by suggesting Labour authorities could increase council tax, saying he believes voters are ready to pay more. Senior Labour figures have been trying to play down expectations, having previously boasted they were on track to seize Tory strongholds in London like Westminster, Wandsworth, and Barnet.